Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kentucky Today podcast. Kentucky Today is the news resource of the Kentucky Baptist Convention. I'm Lawrence Smith, editor of Kentucky Today, and alongside, as usual, Mark Maynard, who's our managing editor, and Chip Hutchison, the content editor for Kentucky Today. Guys, we're going to start talking about first a number of stories that ran in Kentucky Today this week, obviously, but first a big story across the state. Really, it's a national story. And that's the flooding that has impacted so many parts of our Commonwealth. Mark, let's start with you. You've done several stories on churches that have been impacted by the flooding. Give us some examples of what you found.
Yeah, the churches, what I've found is the churches, some were affected, but most of them are out helping. And I love to see that. And a great example of that is Trinity Southern in Falmouth, Kentucky. And Falmouth, they had to actually evacuate the town, and it was mostly because of the utilities and, what could happen with that. But it was kind of a quick thing, a quick turnaround, and people were going every which way. And the good folks at Trinity Southern with Abram Crozier, his team, they went out and knocked door to door on houses and helped people, pack stuff, get over and help them get out of town. And then they came back into town on Monday, and he had food for everybody. They had a big cookout. They had hamburgers and hot dogs, a free meal. Just come and get it. And I just thought that was fantastic, a good way to help your community. And they do that very well. They do things like that all the time. And, Lawrence, that's what just from talking to a lot of these pastors and things, they are worried about their church if they got water. But, it was mostly they're worried about other people. They're worried about the community. They're worried about their church members. And that's kind of what I saw with it. And I thought, that is great because Kentucky Baptists are known for helping and having a cooperative spirit with each other. And certainly they showed that.
Yeah, in fact, Mark, you did a story on a larger church in Bullitt County that's helping a smaller church plant that was affected by the flooding. Talk about that story of cooperation.
Yeah, that's, of course, the church here that was flooded, and it was flooded pretty bad, and it was Mercy Hill. And it is a church plant out of Mount Washington 12 years ago. And when Paul Chitwood was the pastor there, he actually helped in planning that church. And the pastor there, his name's Nate Young. He's been there the whole time. And First Baptist Church in Shelby, in Shepherdsville, has volunteered to help them in many ways, including they were going to offer their gymnasium to him for Sunday, but he couldn't get all these people there to get to the church. But we had a great picture, the story was in today, a great picture of the pastor and his son riding a kayak inside the church building and just kind of floating around in there. He said they had 3.5 feet of water in their building. But you know what, the great thing about that, another cooperative spirit thing, he has had countless people call him and from other churches and say, just let us know, we'll bring men and we'll come and help. And he's also already reached out to Ron Crow at Disaster Relief, and they're, I think, assessing some of the damage there and seeing what they can do and get it cleaned up. But he was very appreciative of Kentucky Baptist just being friends to him, and being somebody that wants to help. So, and the First Baptist Church in Shepherdsville, they're going to have a combined Easter service, and they're going to let Nate Young, he's going to be he's going to speak at the Easter service. Stan Lowry is the interim there, and he Stan's a great guy. I know we all know him, great person, and he's just there to help them. And that's what we've seen with this flood. It's good to have some good news with it, I guess.
That is a pretty startling picture of Nate Young and his son in a kayak inside the sanctuary in water. That is an amazing picture, and it is a great story, again, of cooperation between these two churches. Chip, you did a story on how Dawson Springs First Baptist is helping kind of lead the response in the community.
Yes. This Dawson Springs, small community of 2,200 people in Hopkins County. Madisonville is the county seat. And that community has been ravaged. The December 2021 tornado did extensive damage there. They had another tornado in May of 2024, and now this flooding. So that community actually drew national news reporters. Major national TV networks were in Dawson Springs. This time the flooding impacted primarily businesses, and Mike Jika is the pastor of Dawson Springs First Baptist. Not his first rodeo with these natural disasters. He was there for the tornado of 2024, now for the flooding, and just a great heartbeat of loving your neighbor. And Mike said, we're here to do anything we can to help people out. During the most recent tornado, they housed people. People could come in to take showers there, do their laundry there, and now they're going into the community and just whatever they can do to help people out. And that's, when Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbors yourself. That's loving your neighbor, grieving with them. He had, over the damage that was done, he had a church member that has a business there in Dawson Springs, had 3 feet of water in his business. And it was interesting. Mike said, I wasn't sure how I was going to get to church Sunday because of all the flooding there. He said the 2 normal routes I go, they were flooded. And so he said, I called a deacon, and how would he advise I get to church? And the deacon told him, but then the deacon went out and drove the road himself, that route himself, so he could be sure it was okay. So that just shows you, and we use that word cooperation a lot, that's caring for each other and making sure that each other, their needs are met and that their safety is provided.
It's a tragedy, no doubt, lots of people affected, but God is using it as an opportunity to spread His gospel, and these churches are coming through, helping their communities. Mark, of course, there's individual churches and people that are helping, but what about Kentucky Baptist Disaster Relief, Ron Crow and his volunteers? Where do things stand with them right now?
Yeah, right now they're still assessing a lot of the damage, and I think the biggest problem they may have is that there's so much widespread damage, not just in Kentucky, but other states. And, a lot of other states that helped Kentucky when they were in trouble, well, they're dealing with some of this flooding as well, especially Tennessee. Tennessee was hit pretty hard. So we don't know how much help we're going to be able to get from outside our own organization. But I know if I know Kentucky Baptist Disaster Relief people, they will come out in huge numbers to come and help and do whatever they can. And there's nobody better to clean up your place than the Kentucky Baptist Disaster Relief people, because they've done it so much. And they also do it with a smile. And most of those guys usually have a joke to tell on top of everything else. So you really have to love them. I really appreciate them. And I know this is tough. And of course they've been busy since, for the last 2 months or so with the Eastern Kentucky issues that they had. So, no rest for them. And I know they're having a training session on Saturday at Midway, and he is having that, regardless of what they need to do this week. And I'm sure they are going to be busy, right away here, putting teams together, deploying people to certain areas of the state. And you can almost pick and choose. It's certainly probably the worst in Central and West Kentucky, Louisville area. Frankfort, got hit pretty good. So I think all those will be, maybe tops on the list. I don't know. But I know they're out assessing right now and determining how they can help.
Well, that training you mentioned is important because they'll certainly need more volunteers. And we've had the flooding, of course, and just days before that, tornadoes that hit down in the Louisville area. So we need all the people we can get to come together and help in the recovery efforts. And I know Ron Crow and his team will do a great job. And we just encourage people to do what they can, whether it's volunteer or otherwise. But before we leave this topic, let's talk about that. How can people help? First, pray, obviously. Second, go to kybaptist.org, click on the red banner you'll see across the top. It says Help Now. click on that and you'll see detailed information about how churches and individuals can help. There are certain things that Kentucky Baptist Disaster Relief needs and certain things it does not need. So you'll see specifics about how you can help, you and your church can help with Kentucky Baptist Disaster Relief. Another example of cooperation going on, the work going on between and among Kentucky Baptist churches. Chip, moving on to something else, you did a story on what's being called an amazing revival in the Salem Association of Baptists. Fill us in about that.
Well, that term amazing, everyone that I have talked to about revival going on in the Salem Association of Baptists, and that is an association, it's a small association, 19 churches, all but 3 of those are in Meade County. 2 are in Breckenridge, and then 1 on the outskirts of Hardin County. And it's a historic association, second oldest association in Kentucky, founded in 1795. And they had an association-wide revival. And Chuck Rudy is the associational mission strategist there. He took that position in July of last year. And he began talking to pastors at the first of the year and churches, and they, under his leadership, they all came together. And Chuck was a member of Grace Point Baptist here in Louisville. Before he took that position, he asked Grace Point pastor Mark Bishop if he would be willing to preach the revival. And Mark said, "We'll do better than that." They brought a host of volunteers from Grace Point, and they helped to serve meals. They cleaned up after the meals were served so that those ladies from the church who had prepared the meals could go into the service. They were out in the parking lot helping people park cars, getting them in as ushers, and they taught a children's church at the same time. They did a teenage service at the same time that was taught by Grace Point members. So it was just a perfect model of unity and cooperation. I had one of our coworkers here who's a member of Grace Point who stopped by my office. I hadn't been in here 5 minutes this morning, and she could not have been more encouraged. She said, and she used that word, Lawrence, that you said, amazing. She said people were so unified, and she said the spirit was so great there. Last night was at Salem Baptist Church. They had to pull chairs from classrooms into the sanctuary because there were not enough seats there for the people. So it was packed out. And so that was all adults. Children in a different area, teenagers were in a different area. And the cooperation among the pastors, and both Chuck and Mark Bishop alluded to that when I talked with them about these pastors were so willing to do whatever it takes so that the gospel would be proclaimed in power and effectively proclaimed. They put aside any, let's say the word jealousies. They didn't want to, they were not territorial. They wanted the gospel to be proclaimed and the people to hear it, and that the lost would be saved. And I think that spirit of unity and them all coming together, the Bible talks about how they all came together in one accord. That was certainly evidenced at this association revival. Held in 3 different churches, packed out each night, and pastors. They had great pastor involvement. You know, it's typical if association or a church has something that pastors, some pass it up. They don't participate. They had, I know at least 15 of the 19 pastors were there, I know, Monday night. So it was just a great display of unity and cooperation. And the people there were ecstatic that rest of Kentucky noticed what was happening in Meade County. And so we're thankful for that, thankful that for the Lord's presence there and the way that he blessed the preaching of his word.
We keep hearing that theme throughout this program, and that's cooperation. The cooperative program is more than just a giving program, which it is, but it's an attitude that we can do more, do better together than we can separately. And we've seen that in the flooding and now in this revival that was held and the Salem Association. So great story, Chip.
Thank you.
Let's turn to a couple of kind of public policy pieces that we did this week, political pieces. First, Mark, tell us about your story of Senator Max Wise going after Governor Andy Beshear over his line item veto of a school safety bill. As some background, House Bill 622 directs millions of dollars to putting resource officers in both public and private schools, but the governor vetoed the private school part of that bill, and Max Wise was not happy, right, Mark?
He was very unhappy about it, and he felt like it was very politicized, and it's kind of hard to argue that. Governor Beshear said he wanted all children to be safe, of course, but that the Kentucky Constitution would not allow public funds to be used for private schools. And that is why he vetoed it. And he said, even the vote, with the charter schools and everything in the last election, what a defeat they had. And he kind of referred to that as well. But, in today's age, we see those stories, way too often where, somebody comes to the school and he has a gun and, just horrific things happen. And we've all seen it. We've read about them. You pray and hope that it won't be your school, but it's, there's no way to know. But one way to protect yourself is these school resource officers. And, they put $34.5 million in that bill to cover for 2 years to cover the SROs, and they make about $20,000. And the private schools would have to put, they'd have to work it out as to how they were going to get them under contract to do all that. But he pretty much pulled the rug out from under that by doing the line item veto. And of course, this came at a time when he could veto something and it couldn't be overturned because it was already past the deadline. And I think, Max Wise really was really upset about it. And he kind of let the governor know in no uncertain terms about how he felt about it. And, he wasn't stopping here. And we'll see what happens in the next session and, over the next year as things move ahead.
Well, it's important to point out, Mark, as well, that the money does not go to the school itself. It goes to the law enforcement agency to pay the salary of the officer that would go inside the school. So it doesn't go directly to the schools, but yet the governor still vetoed it. Yeah,
and it's protecting children and, and teachers and people at the school. And, he felt like he was, that Max Wise said he felt like the governor was saying, well, private schools, people aren't as important. They matter less. They matter less. So, we're not going to give them the money. The governor's probably saying, I'm just standing up for the Constitution, and that's his kind of his out on this, I think. But I don't think he'd have got too much pushback if he'd have let that go and let that happen. Maybe there would have been. I don't know, but I'm not sure it was a good political move for him, actually.
Well, I suspect that this bill will come up again in the next session, and perhaps the next time they'll pass it, before that veto deadline passes, and they can override it if he decides to veto it. Interesting story.
I saw a comment on the story, and it was interesting. The guy said, "What happens if the school's on fire? Does the fire department not come and put it out? They're publicly funded. Well, of course they come and put it out, So I thought that's a pretty good point, actually.
Very good point.
Yeah.
We also ran a couple of public policy editorials this past week. Chip, one that we wrote applauded the passage of the resolution that will allow the Ten Commandments Monument to return to the state capitol. Again, background is a gift from the Fraternal Order of Eagles in 1971. It was removed, it was on display and removed in the early 80s from the Capitol, placed somewhere else because of a construction project, but it never returned. But now, thanks to this resolution, it can return to the state capitol. Chip, talk about the benefits in your view of having that monument there.
Well, we hear a lot about 10 Commandments in public places. The 10 Commandments were given for our good. Who can argue that thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie? So those are good moral, and they've always been accepted in the Judeo-Christian world as good principles to live by. And people who object to it argue separation of church and state. I don't think that's a valid argument, and that's what our editorial said, that those are for the public good, and certainly those should be should have the right. When we talk about religious liberty, we should have the right to see those. There was a case in Florida back probably about 30, 40 years ago, to where a defendant was being tried on a charge of murder, and the judge ordered the 10 Commandments that were in the courtroom, this was in Florida, to be covered up because it said thou shalt not kill, and said that would bias the jury. Well, I would think the jury, number one, would know it is not right to kill. And those 10 Commandments, it's nothing revolutionary. They've been around since those were given to Moses, and they are for the public good. So we think they should be on display in the Capitol. People argue, what about monuments from other religions? I'm going to say I don't think you're going to find anything better than the 10 Commandments. They're more inclusive in their stance about the way we live a moral law. And so I, for one, am thankful that that monument will be back in the Capitol. And I don't think we as Christians can shy away from the fact of this is good for everyone to see, and good reminders on that. The Bible talks quite a bit about the stones of remembrance that we have, and a monument such as this is a stone of remembrance about the way we should live our lives.
Well, the fact is our country was founded on what's called Judeo-Christian principles. Yes. In fact, the editorial quoted John Adams, who said, yes, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So our yes, founding fathers certainly thought it was important. And yes, some of the commandments do refer specifically to our relationship to God. No apology for that. No. We also wrote, we hope that they will serve as a constant reminder of God's holiness, our sinfulness, and our need for a Savior to repair the broken relationship with Him. So it yes, doesn't hurt to see that as you come to work every day at the state capitol.
Yes, you mentioned our founding fathers were, even some of them who we don't consider to be exemplary Christians, but yet they recognized the need for that moral and religious law. George Washington warned about that in his farewell address, and history certainly backs up the fact that the founders were here today. They would say, yes, most certainly post the 10 Commandments, not just in a monument, but in other various places.
All right, we also did an editorial joining the Family Foundation on a call to Governor Beshear to take steps to protect the private spaces of women and girls in the state capitol. It became an issue when a man identifying as a woman, wearing a dress, went into a restroom, a women's restroom at the state capitol that was being used by women and girls at the time, young girls. He was confronted by State Representative Bill Wesley, who plans to file a bill that would require individuals at the Capitol to use the restroom that corresponds with their biological sex. However, the legislature does not go back into scheduled session, until next January. In the meantime, the Family Foundation called on the governor to use his authority and his power to protect women and girls in private spaces. We'll see what he does about that. The governor, to be honest, has shown support for the LGBTQ agenda, so I'd be surprised if he did what the Family Foundation and now Kentucky Baptists want him to do, but it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out over the coming months and also the next legislative session. That editorial ran out in Kentucky Today, as well as the one on the monument, And though you can read those in full right now if you go to our website, KentuckyToday.com. All right. Something less serious now. The college basketball season is over. Florida beat Houston for the men's championship. Some people call it a boring game. It was certainly a defensive game. But beyond that, I think you guys would agree both Kentucky and Louisville have reason for optimism for next year. Mark, what do you think?
There's no doubt. Already both schools are busy in the transfer portal, as is everyone else. But they already have the way too early polls out, and Kentucky has been ranked as high as 5th, I've seen, and Louisville is in that same category in the top 10 with the players they've already put together and what they do have coming back. And we're going to see this every year in college basketball. It's going to be a huge turnover, more than ever before. I don't know how long this the sport can sustain this, or even the schools can afford this. And Congress is getting involved right now with it, and that's going to make it even more of a mess probably. But as far as optimism, people, you already got people buzzing about who Pope has signed and who Kelsey has signed, and I think they both went after the same guy from Alabama, and Kentucky won that one. Kentucky might not win the next one that they go after. I think it's great when Louisville and Kentucky are both really good basketball teams, because it just makes basketball even that much more fun in Kentucky. And we all know basketball is the favorite sport of Kentuckians, no matter what everybody else says. It's the one that matters the most. I think, I look at I saw a column in one of the state papers about, has Florida become the new power of the SEC, of this century, because they've won, 3 championships now, in this century, and Kentucky's only won a couple. And, Florida, for Florida fans, it's still football. That's what matters the most for them. For Kentucky, it's still basketball. And I think Kentucky still has the mantle on favorite team in the SEC. Not favorite team, but team that it means the most. Basketball means the most to Kentucky of the SEC schools.
Chip, you think most Kentucky fans after season 1 of Mark Pope are happy with him?
I think they are very, very happy with him. And, for him to come in and have to revamp the whole team, now he'll have some players who will return for a second season, and I think that's a positive. These guys, of course, our 2 Kentucky players, they're going to stay, and that helps to fuel our hopes for a great year. Getting great people out of the transfer portal. I think the Pope detractors are very, very few and far between. People are very happy with the job he's done. They like the way that he's a supporter of the school and of the state. He is a fan of the fans. He goes out of his way to make sure fans feel like they are that they are appreciated. That was not the case prior to Mark Pope. And he brings just a great sense of enthusiasm. You made mention that some people think it was a boring game. I think that's part, I've thought about that a lot. This game is so physical today. I think it's as physical or more physical than the NBA. And I thought, I would have hated to be an official at that ball game, because there's so much contact. Where are you going to call? The officials cannot, they're in a no-win situation because there's contact on every play. What are you going to call? What are you not going to call? We saw that with the foul on Cooper Flagg in the semifinals. And that's one of the reasons I think the women's game is being so celebrated, because they don't have, it's more of a finesse game. It's more of a skills game, in I think a number of ways than the men's are. So I think you're going to see women's basketball continue to grow. I think this transfer portal is going to have to be addressed. You got some guys who are played for four different schools, and that does not do anything for player loyalty or for fan loyalty. So we'll see what transpires. But I am eager to see what happens this next year for both Kentucky and Louisville.
You're right about the women's game. The audience for that game was up this year, not as much as it was the year that Caitlin Clark was involved, but still the audience is growing for women's basketball. I must say, though, as the lone Cardinal fan here, Pat Kelsey's killing it in the portal. I'll tell you that much right now. He is doing well in the transfer portal. In fact, ESPN in its way too early top 10 of next year has Louisville number 3. So a lot to look forward to next year in basketball for both Louisville and Kentucky, and we hope for the other state schools as well, Western, Eastern, Murray, all the other state schools as well. We hope have good years. As we wrap up, congratulations to James McDonald. He was named the Missionary Service Corps Missionary of the Year at the WMU annual meeting last weekend. He's a Bible teaching ministry. That's his ministry in southeastern Kentucky, inspired by another Bible teacher that was in that position before him, but he was named the MSC Missionary of the Year, so congratulations to him and to the WMU for having another great annual meeting this year. This year is in Winchester Central Baptist Church. All right. Thanks for joining us. For more, go to KentuckyToday.com. And for more on the Kentucky Baptist Convention, go to kybaptist.org. Lord willing, we'll see you next time on the Kentucky Today podcast.